listening and having respect for what you hear, not wanting things to be other than they are, not thinking that you're right at the beginning. It's going in with an openness and a patience and a kindness to the other and to yourself.
I've learned more listening to podcasts than I learned in my 2 years of college.
Right now is a great opportunity to leverage the power of voice.
No one's going to be able to offer the world what you can.
It took someone else that had a bigger vision than me to be able to show me the way. And so now that we're here, we can show others the way. What if you can do what you love to fight what you hate?
Be on Air, powered by Podcast Farm. Hello, beautiful listeners. Welcome to another episode of Be On Air. I'm your host, Kaylee Marks, and today I have brought on an extraordinary couple to share the importance of getting into our body and what does that even mean? Why is that important? How it can radically change your life. So with us today, we have Marcela and Mat Wakeham. Marcela is a senior yoga teacher and a movement therapist and a lifelong practitioner of yoga, dance, and Pilates. She has 20 years of experience in the field of body awareness, mindfulness, and body-mind movement related practices and is versed in anatomy and physiology. Over the years, Marcela has searched for practices and teachings which improve our sense of well-being, embodiment, and self-expression. She's also a sweat lodge and cacao ceremony facilitator. Mat benefits from a lifetime of spiritual study, formal practice, training, and personal experience. Within this, there's a consistent thread of mindfulness-based meditation, supported by loving awareness, concentration, and compassion. First learnt on a retreat in the forests of Thailand and continued in self-practice and on retreat in UK. His healing journey over the last 20 years has taken in analysis, hypnotherapy, acupuncture, and psychedelic plant medicine. These he combines with external practices too, most predominantly strength and fitness training, as well as yoga and martial arts, and most recently, somatic sexual healing, breathwork, and cold exposure. His synthesis of these has led him to discover a natural embodied simplicity to his understanding of well-being and spirit. His journey speaks to the truth that if we want to, and if we're willing to address the habitual patterns stored in our bodies, we can open to pleasure, conscious connection, and self-love to live guided by the body's own wisdom. They are hosts of the Body Knows podcast, and I'm very excited to interview them and go deep on today's episode. Stick around. Welcome, Mat and Marcela. It is so wonderful to have you on the show. How are you both doing today?
Oh, thank you for having us in your podcast. Well, we're fine. I am all right.
Yeah, great, Kaylee. I just want to acknowledge you doing the live intro. That's always, one of the decisions you make, whether you're going to do a live one or record one. And it's one of the things I love about your show is that, it's not just about the message of the podcast, it's about the method as well. Right off the bat, I'm like, oh, look at him just put it out there. Well done.
I might have to use that, Mat. I appreciate that. I might have to use that. It's not just it's not the message, it's the method as well. That's very, very good.
That's one of the things that I have in my repertoire. It's the body work and embodiment, somatic practices are Marcela's living, whereas they're what I do personally. I have a long professional path through marketing, advertising, storytelling, getting the story out there, which is what I love about your little intro clip as well that you tell about.
Thank you so much. And we're going to get into your body of work as well today. I would love to share with the listeners a little bit about your past, because you've been involved in some huge, massive projects, and the podcast launch, the artwork for the Body Knows, everything that came out is so top notch, so pro, and it's a really great example of how to do a launch right, how to do the promotional graphics right, and everything. So we're going to dive into there. But I thought we could start, since you two are a lovely couple, maybe you could share with us, how did you two meet?
Oh, wow. That's a brilliant question. I love it. We meet in the beautiful island of Ibiza in Spain. I was living there, working and living with friends. And I met Matthew in the place I was working, in one of the most beautiful places in Ibiza, in a restaurant and hotel, agroturismo called Cantalias, run by the son of Terry Thomas.
He's a famous English actor from the 50s and 60s and sort of the 70s. He was part of an expat community who moved out to that island, the original Bohemians who moved to that famous party island that's been a island for Bohemians since a long time back into history. That's another story. Yeah, and I saw Marcela. Marcela was the first person I saw. I took when I got out of the car. I'd taken my sister on holiday there, and we got out of the car, and I saw Marcela walking across the dining room, and something clicked in me, and I was like, "Oh boy, here we go." There's a lot. I mean, how much of this story would you like, Kaylee? There's a long story there.
Well, it's always interesting to the origin stories, right? And couplehood is such a vital piece of our society. You know, I consider it the bedrock, the kernel, the seed of society, right? It's like you're either alone or you're in community, and the first community is when you're in couplehood.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're right.
It's amazing to hear how two souls can be spinning around the planet and somehow cross paths, and then this amazing collaboration can spring forth. So how did so Matt, were you already into body work and all that when you met Marcela?
I was 16 years ago. I guess I would have been doing martial arts would have been a big part of my main practice then, and strength training, as I knew it then, would have been what I was doing. So I would have been doing physical practices, but quite external practices, kind of based a lot on social constructs of masculinity, now looking back on it. So yeah, I was very in the body, and also had I'd spent, as my biography said, and I've had a lifelong inquiry into what it means to, what spirit means. So I'd read a lot of practices. So I had spiritual practices. I mean, one of the things that, Ibiza is, it's known for being a party island, but it's also got a very big Bohemian and spiritual community. So that was one of the things that drew me there as well. But it's been a long journey, and our relationship's been a big part of, it's been my life for the last 15 years. So yeah, it's vastly changed. It's funny to think back to who I was and who I thought I was then.
And that's the power, right, of the alchemical transformation of relationship and partnership, as it can take us to new levels that we just could not have reached alone. So Marcela, where were you in life when that meeting happened? Were you already doing yoga and somatic work at that point?
In that point in my life, I was doing spiritual work. I was doing ceremonies, leading ceremonies for women. I was doing Pilates and yoga, also teaching that part. But mainly I was into ritualistic dance. I was opening art and spiritual ceremonies in one of the galleries in Ibiza. I was working closely with a spiritual artist, which she was working with crystals, and all art was about spiritual awakening, let's say. So when I met Matt, what attracted me to him is because he was reading a spiritual book. So I said, oh wow, that's interesting. This guy that is not just here for the party, also is into the spiritual path. And that was like, if I open the doors to him, is because I knew he was in contact with that. And yeah.
What book was it, if you don't mind sharing, or if you remember?
You say, Emma.
I can't even remember what it was called. It was, this is a funny phase. I mean, it was very much in my seeker phase. So I was looking. It was before I'd found what Jack Cornfield, the Western Buddhist teacher, calls the one seat. Now that one seat can be anything, but you've got to choose where you're going to sit and what you're going to practice with. So this was a book, but it was a new age book, really. Wouldn't you say that's a fair title for it, Marcella? It was by a guy called Drumvalo Melchizedek, and what was it called?
I think it's the flower of life.
The flower of life. And it was we went and did a retreat with him, and it wasn't what I decided that wasn't the path for me.
It was a stepping stone.
It was a path of inquiry, and it was not one that I in the end decided spoke to me fully.
Well, maybe we could talk about that. So at a certain point, you two have become who you are now, and that's a journey. And maybe what we could do is, for the listeners, in today's society, we aren't really instructed to quiet the mind often and get into the body. And what does that mean? And we're not trained from young age, or many of us aren't, to tune into the innate wisdom of the body. So maybe you could break down why that's important, and a little bit about your journey to kind of creating this collaboration that you two have going, this beautiful collaboration.
Do you want to go first, Marcy?
Okay. Why it is important to inquire into your own self? I guess is because you want to live a life fully engaged with everything which is alive. It could be your partner, it could be the surroundings, and yes, they don't teach us that in school. And I always grow up with something that was missing. I remember being like 9 years old, and I saw a video of me that someone asked me, "What do you want for a present?" And I say, "I want to be happy." And which kids at 9 years old say that? That means that I wasn't happy. So I think my quest of finding myself, it started when I hear that video. Wow, I think I need to inquire to myself, and always been into the art of moving the body. I did my career in dance, contemporary dance, and that if there was something to make me happy, it was moving my body. And as well as that's why when I finished my career, I started to enter into ritualistic dance, because it was just not dancing for the spectator. I was dancing to the moon. I was dancing to the sun, as my tradition is. If you go to the Aztec tradition in Tenochtitlan, you're going to see the dancers, the concheros, dancing to the moon, to the stars, to the cosmos. So that was my initiation into my inquiry into, let's go deeper into this. And when I was doing meditations over in nature, I just started to feel my body waking up. One day I clearly saw my aura. It was beautiful green, emerald green. And I say, this is it. This is my path. And then I was introduced into the practice of yoga, which has quite a lot of spiritual connotation already there imprinted. So as I was doing yoga, I arrived to England, and little by little start to go more into the Western tradition of somatics. Starting with people that they are in touch with the somatic world more deeper, into inquiring into cell memory or cell consciousness, moving through bones consciousness and muscle consciousness, which is body mind centering, and practices like continued movement, Emily Conrad, which she channels her practice. And that the quest started. This is incredible, going inwards and inwards and deeper till I found myself that I could regulate my nervous system. I could do little techniques, breath techniques, movement techniques, that it gave me that sense of well-being when my system start to be overwhelmed, which I have due to my background my system goes in overwhelm very easily because I have a difficult childhood. My father was very strict with us. And the reason later, after doing all this work, I understood, because my father his mother died very abruptly, burned alive. So I understood why my father was so strict, and I understood why he was the way he was. I just healing these parts of me, healing those little by little, understanding where it comes from, my life experience from inside out, and dealing with those with so much care and compassion. And it was just one little day and movement initiation at a time. And yeah, I think so. That's my path. Why it's so important? Because you want to be whole. You want to be in this life fully alive and absorbing the whole entire nature inside of you. And the more you go in and parts of yourself being healed, you can extend that, and you can bring trees and rivers inside of your body, and then you become so more vast than just a human being. You're more bigger than that.
That's amazing. I want to hear from Matt before I respond to that. I love. There's so much to dive into there.
Right?
Yeah, but please, Matt, add to it and share your experience coming into it, and we'll go deeper.
I thought Marcela's starting point in her childhood's very interesting, because I've come to realize myself that there was a figure in my childhood. When I was very young, my parents used to have lodgers. People stay in the house to help cover the mortgage, to make a little bit of money on the side, and in fact later had a little guest house. But one of the first people who made a really big impact on me was a young male nurse who rented the room. His name was Peter, and he was, now I look back on it, I realize I was really gravitated to him, and I was super small, like 3, 4, and there was something really just different about him. He was kind and he was happy. And growing up in the lower middle class, my parents were really working class English background. It was quite austere in England in the 70s, and life was sort of seen in terms of surviving. There's a real survival mentality, and he had something really different. And it turned out he was Buddhist, and he talked about that, and that seed was really planted in me, I guess, at that point. And so I didn't really, it's only looking back that I put those things, that seed. I see the seed and how the fruit of that seed has grown. Sort of jumping forward, I always had an interest. I had an interest in really understanding who I was, and what it meant to be alive, and it meant to be human. But of course, I was educated in a Western education system, so the tool that I primarily used to do that was my mind. It was a top-down investigation. It was an intellectual investigation. It was a trying to understand and quantify with knowledge. I used psychedelics to do that. And this was a time when I was doing that, would have been in the late 80s and early 90s. There was a time, I guess like 88 was called the second summer of love. And it was very much there's a renaissance in psychedelics now. And I talk about this with a friend of mine who's now a therapist who works with psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression on one of our episodes. She was a contemporary who, I actually was there when she took her first psychedelic trip. So that was one of the tools that I used, and I read a lot. I read a lot of Buddhism, and as you've asked, as we've said already, I was looking at all sorts of things and just trying this, that, and the other, and jumping from one thing to another, which is what a lot of people do as seekers. And then we went, Marcela and I went, when she went to do her yoga teacher training, we went to Thailand, where she was studying, and where she actually met all of her colleagues that she works with now to this day, and who are other guests upon our podcast actually. And I took this as, Thailand is a Buddhist nation, and I took this as a chance. While she was day in day out going to her yoga teacher training, and we'd gone there to visit my sister, who was doing around the world a trip around Asia at the time. They left, and I went off for a 2-week silent meditation retreat at a place called Swan Mok, which is the retreat center set up by a Buddhist master called Ajahn Buddhadasa. And I was frankly shocked at what I experienced. I had all these, I'd read all these Buddhist books, and I could debate ideas of Buddhism. And I thought, it's like, I'd been, the first book I'd read on Buddhist practice was, I'd read when I was 17 or 18. When I sat down in silent meditation for 2 weeks, slept in a room with a wooden pillow, didn't talk, had to do everything in silence. It's not very silent, actually, because you just have this raging monster inside your head, just talking absolute rubbish. And it's like, I compare it to it's like you're locked. I compared it to being locked in the cupboard with my teenage self, and it was just like, I'm just glad no one could hear that.
Wow.
The monkey mind. And it's called the monkey mind in Buddhism because it just swings from branch to branch, screaming and flinging its excrement around at you. So yeah, but at some point that just slowly abated. I'd committed to it, and I was like, no, I'm going to stay here. And my mind, at some point during that retreat, my mind gave up, and I entered a real serene space of just connection. And just direct experience of the felt sense of my body on the cushion, the breath coming into my body, being alive. It's not, I wasn't thinking about being alive and thinking about what does it mean to be alive. I was like, oh, I am alive. Where do I experience that? Right here, right now, in the body. So then that was that really kicked in then, and that I had I built upon that practice from there, and that was my story into sitting meditation and Buddhist inquiry, and from there everything sort of built slowly, day by day, upon that experience by experience, and really breath by breath.
So what's interesting about this is the first of all, there's like 5 different topics collectively that we could go into, so we'll probably have to do a round 2. Excuse me. But I'm thinking from the listener's perspective, I want to build a little bit of for anyone listening who feels like maybe there's some terms or some experiences that maybe could be helpful to clarify. What is the reasoning for getting into our body? So I heard to feel more joy, to feel more pleasure, to have a better life experience, to thrive, not just survive. Why is it? What is it about the body that holds the key to healing trauma, that holds the key to bringing our full energy and gifts to the world? What is it about the body?
Well, the body is the one who keeps it, who keeps the memories. We hold the memories of whole creation in each cell. We hold the memories from where we were just living on water. We hold the memories when we were reptilians. We hold the memory where we were the first mammals and the first humans. Is in our inbuilt system, body system, cell. In each cell, you have that memory. The mind, what it does is act upon is just looking straight at it and feeding off from information inside of the body. When you start to clear energies or energies stuck in the body, little by little start to play out into your life. So a friend of mine explains very well, when you work with the body, you have to be very gentle, because if you overwhelm the system, or you open the lid of the subconscious, what is inside of this body memory, you can overwhelm yourself. So that's why it's so important to go little by little into inquiry inside of yourself.
And that's why the conscious mind, can be so frightened of the idea of looking at the subconscious. There's plenty of people who say, I'm not interested in looking, I'm in, there was a real stigma. I mean, more so in the UK than there would be with you guys over there on the other side of the Atlantic about therapy. It's because people, said, oh, I don't want to look at the monsters that I have in there. But, as Jung said, I might, to be whole, I must have a shadow. And to fully understand yourself, you need to be willing to look at those things. But as Marcela was saying, if you just rip, if you just rip the plaster off, it's going to hurt, and then your mind's you're just gonna jump back from it, and it's going to be an overwhelming,
traumatizing,
re-traumatizing, because we are all traumatized from life, and that can be a trauma with a capital T. We can have experienced abuse of all sorts of levels, and it can be trauma with a small t. But life is traumatizing, just not having the sovereignty. You don't have sovereignty as a child, just by its very nature as being a child. You have to live by the dictates of adults, and those adults have, doing the best they can, but they might not have had the love that they needed. They might have been imprinted, what they believe parenting or teaching or discipline wasn't a good model. So that you're looking at all those things simplistically, let alone anything else on top of that.
Yeah, so there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score by, maybe you guys help me with their name.
Basil van der Kolk.
Boom.
Yeah.
And so the cutting edge, as far as besides the maps and the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, the cutting edge trauma healing therapy that I know of is neural feedback, and he has a training that he does with that. But The Body Keeps the Score. Physical ailments can actually cause, traumatic experiences that maybe didn't hurt the body, quote unquote, can cause physiological diseases, illnesses, injuries, all sorts of things can come about.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It doesn't even have to manifest as they may manifest as injuries if you ignore them for long enough, but they may materialize, as they did in myself, as migraine, as muscle strain, as discomfort, or as a complete lack of feeling.
Yeah, clinical depression, anxiety, or the system overwhelms. Is if you are not fully embodied and you cannot feel, your system is so tight or so depleted, you cannot fully engage with what is in front of you. You don't have the boundaries because you are very totally down, depressed, or you are so tight. You are so in that moment of nothing enters into my system, that you reject all information. So both ways you
live out of ideology. Yeah.
And live, yeah, exactly. And
so I just want to ask real quick here, because this is really powerful information, and it is not mental information. Like there is an aspect that is info that we can hear, but what I'm hearing is that there's a huge part of it that has to be felt. And so I wanted to ask, what is the quickest way for our listeners, if they want to experience being in body? What is the quickest way? Is there a short practice that you could kind of help the listeners just to ground into their body so that we can have a tangible somatic, understanding?
So the one who comes up into my mind just right away is a sense of touch. Sitting in a place that you feel comfortable, in a chair, on the floor, doesn't matter, and just start to touch your face, just being aware of your first boundary, the skin, and just bit by bit going to your neck, bring the hands down to your chest, and really feel it. This is me. This is me. This from here inwards. From here is my insides, and from here out is the world. So just going very methodically, very slow, and very, very conscious about who is this body? Is my body? It's been here, going to love and kindness. This skin has been protecting me from the rays of the sun or from cold. Putting the hands into your heart, feeling the beat of your heart. This heart has been beating since the moment I'm in the womb in my mom. It's been there for me. Well, for me, 44 years. Is going into your stomach and just feeling this, the turning of the intestines. My intestines have been processing a lot of good food, a lot of bad food, and it does. So just turning into this. We are not a machine. We are a living ecosystem that every organ, it has its saying. The skin, it has its consciousness. You can go deep into your bones, your marrow that is creating blood cells every time and creating these T cells to fight infection. So just going a little bit more deeper of inquiring who I am. Really, I am a beautiful biological entity that every day is processing things and making the best for being alive, even though that things that look wrong, it help because every day is like a victory. I survive. My body did everything for survival.
Something you said really interesting there, Marcella, as well, is that it's like it may look wrong, or you might, ideas may come up that it's like you might start having ideas about your body, and at this moment it's okay. It's like you can just say to yourself, look, for this moment I'm going to set aside ideas about what the stories that I carry about my body. And there might be areas where you don't feel. You might touch yourself and you might not have feeling there, and there might be areas where you have stories about touch. It's like you might a man's going to have a different feeling touching his chest than a woman is. Everybody's got stories about when they go down to their genitals, if they touch themselves there. These things, our body carries massive stories, and it's okay. You need to tell yourself it's okay. And what Marcella said there was, it's having some compassion for yourself as well. And
if the story comes up, let's say if someone is touching the genitals and the story comes up into that moment, that's what it calls titration. For don't overwhelm and go more into the story, you come back up to the heart. You don't have to linger into the place that it might be. All right, this if you start to do this exploration, let's say, and you touch a part of the body, and the body starts to see, oh my God, this is danger. Come back up, or in other area that is a resource where it brings you goodness. So again, you bring that quality of taking care of yourself instead of going deeper into, I want to inquire and I want to heal that. No, because in the process of the body, there is no goal orientation. Right. You have to be very gentle. You have to be very slowly, like a slow, beautiful.
Because it's like we want to treat ourself almost as if we would treat our child. Right? Like with that level of love.
Exactly. Yes. With that level of love, with that level of compassion, with that level of understanding that we don't have everything figured out. Is not possible. And we never going to have, thanks goodness. Otherwise life would be very stale and we know everything. No.
You'd be like the Cyclops. and it's also it's like this is a time, you know, we're coming out of a period where we've all been starved of touch and connection, and actually there's a paradox in that, because we've all had the ability all the way through this to touch ourselves, but we all have pathways that we do that. We all have habitual touch, you know, ways that we do things. And actually, can you just be with yourself, with, as Marcela said, without a story? Can you just feel and just notice? And that's where mindfulness comes in. And mindfulness is a tricky word, because I think you hear it in the West and it feels like you're doing something with your mind. You know, it's mindfulness. What do I do with my mind? Well, I think so. Have I got to think about these things? And it's just being present for what's coming up. And as Marcela said, if a story comes, you know, if you touch somewhere and a habit or a story, you start going into things, can you just notice that? And can you come back? Just come back to what it is.
I want to ask you, I want to get into the podcast, you know, in a second here, and it'll lead in, but I want to just address this. I think that, and I'd be curious on both of your thoughts. So in today's world, would you agree that men especially are sort of trained, or maybe physiologically because of nature, for whatever reason, to not be very connected in with our body? And so oftentimes men might feel numb, which is a feeling, you know, that, like you were saying, you might not feel a sensation. I'm not saying women don't also feel this, but would you say that is a kind of a consistent issue for men, is being disconnected from the body?
I think it's okay. So now we're getting into sort of the realms of the patriarchy, and I think it's important to acknowledge that men are not the patriarchy, and it's that women are raised within the patriarchy as well. And so it's not a man thing to just not be able to feel. Now, we may be conditioned differently, and then, you know, boys may be brought up to the whole, you know, to rough and tumble, and the only emotion that's okay to express is anger, and violence is okay. And then, you know, that's a whole other conversation about conditioning of boys and what it means to be a man. But I think I think that's doing men a little bit of a disservice, and it's not fair to say that, because I think it's as humanity, the major problem is our disconnection from ourselves, and that's men and women, and, you know, and it's not binary. When it's people who identify as male, people who identify as female. It's non-sexualized, it's not genderized. You know, it's actually just it's a Western cultural experience, because we're so top down, we're disconnected. You know, there's still a prevailing tradition where we believe that, you know, that we ask questions about, you know, even this conversation we're having, is it the mind or is it the body? It's one thing, you know. It's like you know, the mind is in the body, and it's
the mind body.
It's in the body, and actually, it's an old way of looking at things. Neuroscience hasn't looked at that division, looked at it that way since the 80s, you know, but it's still prevailing because it's such a cultural assumption.
Yeah, that I really appreciate that clarification. That makes sense. We're all part of this cultural system, at least in the West, at the very least, where that trains us to create a disconnect where there's not one. And even
the heritage of the West as well. You know, we're colonial. You know, we're all living with the heritage of colonialism as well. So the Western mindset,
let's talk about that, because
everywhere.
Yeah, we come from an ancestry of like fleeing. So I follow this one author, Resma Menachem. He wrote My Grandmother's Hands, and he talks a lot about how racial trauma is stored. Both white people and black people have racial trauma in our bodies from our ancestors going through, you know, and even like taking race out of it, just fleeing from, you know, all the pilgrims, like, you know, we were running away from something. And so we have the ancestors, we have that in our body, that fleeing.
Well, and so it's like, obviously a lot of the dialogue you hear on the internet is about the North American experience, because obviously that's such a large culture, and that's the majority of culture. But I'm you know, so you've got a Mexican woman here and an English man. The trauma that I've experienced is being being made, you know, my ancestors were made to work in fields, in mines, in factories, were sent to war. That's the trauma, that's the ancestral trauma that I'm experiencing, and that is within my DNA. Marcella's trauma is completely
it's
different.
the same. It comes to colonialism, even though you say because when America was colonized, it's exactly, we have a genocide there where all indigenous people were put to work in mines, in plantations, till the verge of extinction. And so this colonization is just pervades since I don't know, the 1500s perhaps. I don't know where. And all these memories is stuck in our bodies. When I arrived here to England, me from Mexico, I remember carrying these colonial diminishing of myself, because I am from I've been conquered. And it's not something that is just out into the world or into the surface of my consciousness. It was deep ingrained inside of me, where I said, why I feel this, why I don't feel my fully self here. But that was these memories and these just passing through, that we were conquered.
And I live with the other side of colonialism as well. It's that I've talked about the experience of those of my ancestors, my direct ancestors, and my family lineage, who are working class. Then, of course, I can't deny the fact that I'm English, and of what we did colonially. You know, the legacy of violence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what we're, you know, and that we're all still living with that, you know, looking at what's happening, you know, with what we did in the Middle East, it's a huge political quagmire, right?
And it's a time of reckoning for everyone in their body, I think, and the way forward. And this leads into your podcast. So the way forward is through the portal of Soma, as my dear friend says. She has a podcast called the Synchrosoma podcast. Shout out to Melissa Meter there.
I love her.
Oh, cool. That's wonderful. Yeah, me too. And
really
and so it's a portal. And so maybe let's move into the Body Knows podcast.
That's a beautiful term. It's a portal. Yeah. I mean, the latest episode that Marcella, she just did a bonus episode. And it was great listening to, being in the audience and listening to it. And there's a great, one of her guests gave this great explanation about of yoga, as the asana, the positions being like an alphabet, and so and it's a language, and that language, it transports you to another dimension, and it's a dimension of awareness, you know, of knowledge, and that knowledge you can only become aware inside yourself. There's no other place to wake up. That's it. That's the vessel we've got.
It's bringing that awareness. I think so. That's why the podcast, we create, Mat and I, we create the podcast just to bring that awareness, because I carry these. I don't know, when I start to grow up more deeper into myself and I start to share my wisdom, it comes from pouring inside of me, and from the spirit and from nature. So I cannot hold it in my body anymore. I need to take it out. So one day I say, Matthew, what about if we do a podcast about these beautiful wisdom of the body, and interview people that it can tell their little bits of the story, because everyone has their own way to explain how the body is alive and how the body can hold the wisdom. And it's a way of decolonize people. My quest as a sweat lodge leader, cacao ceremonies, is to eradicate the colonial mind. To in my beliefs, everyone has available in their cells the ancestral knowledge of communing with nature, of a way to return to the natural essence, which is ourselves. And what is that? Is through art, dance, singing, talking to a tree, poetry. It doesn't matter how it comes out, because when you work with your body and you little bit start to liberate that energy, the first what infuse your whole life is creativity, is art, is those things. Suddenly you have the space to expand your wings and take a little bit of the beauty of life inside of you. And everyone is an artist. Everyone is connected with spirit. So that's why it's so important to work with that, or for us, Matt and I, say, yeah, let's do that. Let's take it out. Take out these.
I love something you said that reminded me of something I heard Francoise Borzat say on a podcast the other day. She's a really interesting woman. She trained with in indigenous wisdom. She's a French woman, but trained with indigenous wisdom, actually, in a tradition that Marcela has experienced within as well, with psilocybin, with a very famous teacher in Mexico. And one of the things that she said is, once you've experienced, once this has woken up in you, it's just like you can't not want to share it. And as I think I said at the beginning, for Marcela, this is her livelihood, and we're beginning to use the podcast more as a way to get that out there, and for it to be a business tool for that. And we've been, we've been inspired by other podcasters who do that. A woman called Julia Allen, who runs a podcast called Authentic Sex. And she basically interviews, she lives in a very switched on area in Australia, and she basically interviews all of her friends, all of the people in her community, and then she's sponsored by her own products and by her own teachings, and it's really great. But for me, the podcast was an end in itself. I wasn't looking, although I am training in somatic sexual healing. It's not something I'm doing, it's not something that I'm currently monetizing. It's just a training that I'm doing. What was the most important thing was to share this experience we have, because it's transformative. I've lived a life of pain that I've inflicted on myself physically, mentally, emotionally, and these technologies, these ancient technologies, have unlocked life. They're there. It's there for everyone. You don't need to go and have interventions. You don't need to see someone. You don't. Although look, I've sat at the seat of wise teachers. I've had healing at the hands of really amazing people, but in the end, the experience is one that you live, and it comes out through you. One of my Buddhist teachers said the only book worth reading is the heart.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, from my experience with both of you, is if it really feels like you found something that has transformed your lives, and you're excited and inspired to share it with everyone. And that's what the Body Knows podcast is all about, is you're interviewing you're talking to each other, you're interviewing other experts and folks embodying this knowledge and living it. And you're giving a wealth of knowledge, and you cover everything from healing trauma to what Tantra actually means, to conscious and sexual healing. And so, what, for the listeners who are a lot of podcasters, what are some of the things that have really worked for you in the launch of this first season? And what are some tips or ideas that you could give the listeners, as far as if they're thinking either of launching their show or just how to take it to the next level?
Well, our first season, we came to realize is, we've spoken we've shared our experience through, we've interviewed friends and colleagues and teachers our own directly. So this first season has been very well. I think one of the things that's amazing about podcasting is it's direct, right? It's very, it's like authenticity is what what attracts people to the communications. It's like there's no filter. I've worked in professional media, in film, in TV, in broadcasting, and there's layers in between there. There's editorial, there's codes of things that can and can't be said. That doesn't apply in podcasting. That's up to you. You decide what can and can't be said. There's things that we've decided not to go into, and there's things that we haven't. But I think that's the most. I think what it boils down. The first thing you've got to work out is your why. Why are you having these conversations? And we were taught that. We went on a podcasting course. We're run by a guy, which is very much like you run yourself, Kaylee. Was run by a podcaster, guy called Mark LaRouste. And I feel really lucky because it was a course called the Podcast Revolution, and he stopped it now. He's been podcasting a long time. He had a podcast called The Unconventionalist, and I'm speaking in the past tense because he's stopped now. So I feel really lucky that Marcela and I got to be the last cohort of his podcast revolution, and we did that with some great other podcasters. I think you've spoken to one, is that right? Did you interview Ravi?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. That now it makes sense. That's awesome. So you guys went through this accelerator, and for those listening, I run a similar kind of mastermind called Amplify What You Love. And the power of going through these launches together is that it can be overwhelming to launch alone. And the benefit of everyone's brains and ideas and just moral support and encouragement. And then when the podcast launches, you're sharing and interviewing each other. It's just very valuable to go through with like you said, a cohort.
It's just like there's 1,000,001 reasons you're going to have in your head why you don't put your podcast out there. What microphone should I use? You can see Marcela and I are sitting here still, with just I've got the free headphones that came with my phone, and it's like it does. It's like it doesn't sound like studio quality, but that's not the most important thing. It's like I love the Silicon Valley, ship fast, fail fast.
Yes.
Get it out there. We could have worried and tried and tried to perfect everything. The podcast we've learned the most from was the one where we kind of crashed and burnt a bit. It's like we didn't have the interview that we thought we were going to have, and that was you learn on your feet. You've got to get out there. Don't be it's like. Just have the conversations and you learn.
Yeah, it was great to have an eye-opening what exactly I don't want to do in the podcast.
Exactly. There's a lot of there's many parts to podcasting that can be overwhelming. I'm curious, with the idea of ship fast, get it out there, there's reasons. Would you still recommend to people to go through some sort of group launch or some sort of program?
Well, for us, 100%.
100%, absolutely, yeah. Because you know what you're doing. You have the support of the group. You have the support of someone. If there is, because it's that little question, silly question that stop you to doing it. Honest, you're amazing, and there's many people who does not do that. But I think so for the majority of the people, it's very definitely. If you really have the heart of doing a podcast, if you really want to do that, if your heart is pumping, I want to do a podcast, but something is stopping me, just do it. Yes. Do the acceleration, whatever.
The first time we interviewed anyone would have been on our accelerator. Marcela and I are Generation X. So although we were the first generation to have the internet, we didn't come of age with it, and we're not necessarily as comfortable being on camera as maybe millennials or Gen Z are, or of just even the fact that I remarked at the beginning of our interview, I loved you doing a live interview. Marcela and I don't do a live interview, a live intro. We record ours because I always it's like I stumble, I stutter. Marcela cuts me and makes me sound a bit better.
Yeah, I have my brother edit this afterwards to fix all the things. I do want it to go live eventually, but something you said there, so we are getting to the end of the interview. I would love to have you all on in the future again, but at the end of these, I always want to ask just a couple sort of resource collecting rapid fire questions. And so the first one on this category of podcasts is what is one other podcast from each of you that you would like the listeners to tune into? Obviously, The Body Knows. So everyone listening, the podcast that you want to listen to first is you want to go search for The Body Knows podcast. After consuming the entire first season, then Matt, would you share one podcast that you think would bring value to my listeners?
Well, I've already given a shout out to Julia Allen's Authentic Sex podcast. At the moment, I'm really enjoying The Mythic Masculine by Ian McKenzie. I love it. You know, it's really looking at I love, like, for me, as a professional storyteller as well, I love looking at masculinity through the lens of story. And I believe that stories are the key of what makes us human. And, you know, that podcast is really looking at the old myths of masculinity and what masculinity can mean now. It's fascinating conversations with really, you know, heartfelt, amazing insights.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, you shared that with me, and I've been tuning in and really enjoying it. So I definitely recommend that one.
I probably sent you to that one that was about the relationship as the vessel for awareness, right? Yeah, it's amazing.
That's so good. Thanks for shouting out an episode too for the listeners. What about you, Marcella? What's a podcast you'd like people to tune into?
I think so. I like that one that you say, the Synchrosoma podcast. I think so. She's really spot on. She's so authentic. She's very, very fresh, and all her insights are just, I mean, body-wise, therapeutical-wise, very good, spot on. And I like the We Move guys. I like them.
Bless.
They are a very good.
We love We Move.
We interviewed them. The interview, we wish to be better, but I think so. His podcast all the time. They are so wholehearted, and their guests all the time. They're very good, and they put a lot of effort, and it's all about transforming life. I love We Move guys.
They really live their own story.
Yes, they do truly.
We've interviewed them once, and I believe we will go back to speak to them again. And I'd also I'd love to give a shout out to my man Cam Fraser as well, who does a great podcast about sexuality and masculinity. And he's like, if any men wanting to dive into masculinity, all of his channels, you know, Cam Fraser on Instagram, etc. He's a really great Australian sexologist.
Amazing. And one of the goals of this platform is to teach the next generation and young people that about the power of their voice and the power of sharing information and building a council of safe mentors. So if this was given to a large group of young people, and you both could share like one thing about relationships and one thing about the body, maybe you guys could collaborate a little bit and give a message to this figurative group of young people.
I would say first, in relationship, and it's interesting that I've jumped in first and I'm going to say this, but in relationship and in the voice, counterintuitively, the most important thing first is listening. So if you're interviewing someone else, listening to what they're saying is really important. If you're relating to another or relating to your body, listening is really important. Being able to wait and actually hear what's going on instead of chasing what you think is going on or trying to impose your ideas of how something should be on another person, on a situation, on yourself. And really listening and having respect for what you hear, not wanting things to be other than they are, not thinking that you're right at the beginning. It's going in with an openness and a patience and a kindness to the other and to yourself.
Yeah, I would say the same in relationships. Build up a relationship with yourself in a way that you are nurturing compassion to all the bits of yourself, of the mind slashing, your body type. Be kind to yourself, eat well, do everything with reverence to your body. So it can, the moment you start to spill to a relationship out of yourself, you know how to do it. You know how to be kind to that other.
The first
kindness.
Marcela, you just nailed it. The first relationship, the most important relationship you have, is with yourself. And if you don't love yourself, and when I'm talking about self, I hope from this conversation it's really clear that I'm not talking about your ideas of who you think you are, but really just unconditionally coming from a place where you know yourself and you love yourself. If you're getting pulled outside of yourself to start with and you're looking for external love or external validation, you're just going to keep chasing. It's a hamster wheel. Self-love is the most important love.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Both of you, I appreciate your time so much coming on and sharing your work and your message with my audience. And we're definitely going to have you back on if you will honor us. And again, listeners, tune into the Body Knows podcast. Check out Mat and Marcela, what they're working on. When is season 2 coming out soon? Is it out already?
No,
TBD.
No, this was very much part of a build-up to see. One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you was because I wanted to it's a nice little in-breath. It's like we finished season 1. Marcella's doing some little bonus episodes that are about the offerings that she's putting out there. And we just wanted to sort of rest and reflect upon what we've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Maybe set up some other things, some other ways about going about things, and let season 2 come about when it's ready to come about.
Still, the bonus episodes are over there, are out. One is out, the last one, and I'm going to release other one in June. There are more shorter.
Be out by the time this comes out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There are shorter, and there are very interesting ones that are very good too. So even though the season finished, still the Body Knows podcast is producing good conversations.
And I'll continue to produce social content as well. It's like there's still, we communicate our, things come up, information comes up through conversation with each other and through our practice. So there'll be things that we're posting as well. So that's a dialogue as well. That we're in dialogue with. There's an audience that's online as well as the audience that listens. So
yeah. So how could the listeners collaborate and work with you, especially if they would like to learn more about this and work with you? What's the best way to reach out?
I'm there on DMs on Instagram, the Body Knows _podcast. We have a Facebook page. We haven't yet set up a site, so we don't have a mailing list, but that's one thing that we're going to do, But reach out. It's like, there's always conversations to be had. We've got a nice little group of people that we speak with, little communities building through our socials. That's what social media is, right? It's how we're speaking to you now, for example.
They can find me in Embodied Practices. In Instagram, Embodied Practices, also Facebook.
And that Marcela shares her teachings there as well, and all the courses and workshops that she's running. Some she does online.
And retreats.
Yeah.
So if people wanted to do a retreat or take a course or work with you one-on-one, that's a possibility, and they could reach out through Instagram?
Definitely.
Embodied Practices?
Yes.
Awesome. I'll make sure that's in the show notes, listeners. But just to recap, the Body Knows _podcast. This is at Instagram, and Embodied Practices on Instagram. And tune into the Body Knows podcast. Matt, Marcella, it's been an absolute privilege to speak with both of you. Thank you for your time, your energy, and hope to have you on very soon in the future to share some more knowledge.
Oh, thank you. That would be fantastic. It was absolutely honored to be interviewed by you, Kaylee. You have a great energy.
Absolutely. More power to you, Kaylee. Thank you very much.
Big love, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Be On Air. I hope you enjoyed it and are now one step closer to turning on your mic and broadcasting your message to the world. Are you ready to start your own podcast and amplify your brand? Or are you struggling to get your show in front of engaged audiences? I can help you on your broadcasting journey. Get in touch with me and apply for a strategy session if you want to discuss your podcast idea. You can reach me at www.podcast-farm.com. I'm on all the social media. Until next time, my friends, I'm Kaylee Marks. Thanks for tuning in to Be On Air.